My name is Nadia Voss. I am 26 years old. And I need you to understand something before this story begins. The two people who destroyed my life were not strangers. They were not enemies. They were not criminals hiding in the shadows. They were my parents. They sat across from me at the dinner table every Sunday. They sang happy birthday to me every year. They hugged me at my college graduation with tears in their eyes. And then, the moment I tried to build a life away from them, they quietly, deliberately, and methodically burned everything I built to the ground. For 14 months, I applied to over 60 jobs. I had a strong resume. I had a degree in marketing. I had references. I had experience. And I had zero criminal history. Not a single misdemeanor. Not a single mark on my record. But company after company turned me away, sometimes without even a formal rejection, just silence. Total radio silence. I was confused at first. Then I was embarrassed. Then I started sleeping on a couch in my friend's one-bedroom apartment, eating peanut butter crackers for dinner, and wondering what was wrong with me. I had no idea what was actually happening. I had no idea that someone who claimed to love me, was picking up a phone every single time my application landed on a hiring manager's desk. When I finally found out the truth, I did not cry. I started making a plan. Let me take you back to the summer I turned 24, because that is where it all started. Not with a phone call, not with a confrontation. It started with a choice. The most ordinary, most human choice a person can make. I decided I wanted to leave home. I grew up in a town called Garner Falls, in a house that looked perfectly fine from the outside. White shutters, a blue front door, a garden that my mother kept in obsessive order. From the outside, we were a normal family. From the inside, normal was the last word I would use. My parents, Donald and Patricia Voss, were the kind of people who needed control the way most people need oxygen. Not loud control. Not abusive in the way that leaves bruises. It was quieter than that, and in many ways, more dangerous. My mother decided what I wore until I was 17. My father reviewed every friend I made and had a reason to dislike most of them. Every decision I made, from the elective courses I took in school to the music I listened to in my own bedroom, went through them first. I loved them. I want to make that clear because it matters. I genuinely loved them, and for a long time I believed that what they were doing was just parenting, just protection, just love that came out sideways. When I got into Belmore University to study marketing, my father sat me down the night before I left and said, "You can always come back. The door's always open." I thought it was sweet. I thought he was just being emotional. I did not understand, not yet, that what he was really telling me was a warning. College was the first time I felt like myself. I made friends who were loud and messy and complicated in the best ways. I stayed up until 3 in the morning talking about ideas. I joined a student marketing club, and within a year, I was leading campaigns for local businesses as part of our coursework. I was good. My professors told me I was good. I started to believe them. By the time I graduated, I had a clear plan. I wanted to move to the city. I wanted to work in brand strategy. I had saved a modest amount from part-time work, enough to cover 2 months of rent while I job searched. I told my parents at Easter dinner, casually, confidently, the way you tell people good news. My mother set her fork down very slowly. My father looked at the wall behind my head for a long moment before he said anything. Then he said, "I think you should reconsider." Not why. Not because. Just that. Reconsider. I told him I had already made the decision. The dinner ended early that night. 3 weeks later, I moved into a shared apartment in the city with 2 roommates I found online. The apartment smelled like old carpet and something faintly metallic, but I did not care. I was 23 years old and free for the first time in my life. I painted a quote on a piece of cardboard and taped it above my desk. It said, You are allowed to take up space. I know that sounds small, but for someone who had spent 2 decades being quietly made smaller, it was everything. I sent out my first round of applications in August, strong cover letters, a portfolio I had spent 6 weeks building. I applied to 22 positions, entry-level brand coordinator roles, junior marketing analyst openings, even 2 unpaid internship-turned-full-time pathways. I heard back from 4 of them. 2 were rejections. 1 was a scheduling email that never followed up. The last one went completely dark after what I thought was a promising first interview. I told myself it was the market. Everyone said the market was hard. I believed it because I needed to. But here is what I did not know on the day I painted that quote above my desk. My father had already picked up the phone, and the conversation he had that day was not the first. It was not even close to the first. There is a specific kind of suffering that comes from failing and not knowing why. Because when you have no explanation, your mind fills the silence with the worst possible answer. It must be you. By October, I had applied to 41 positions. I had received 12 rejections and 29 instances of complete silence. No feedback, no courtesy calls, just vanishing, like I had thrown my resume into a black hole. I started doing everything the career forms told me to do. I rewrote my resume 4 times. I had a former professor review my portfolio. I practiced interview answers in front of my mirror every morning. I bought a secondhand blazer specifically for interviews. I took a free online course in digital analytics to strengthen my profile. I was doing everything right and getting nothing in return. My savings were disappearing faster than I had planned. City life was expensive in ways that I had not fully calculated. By November, one of my roommates moved out without much warning, and the rent burden split 2 ways instead of 3, became suffocating. I picked up a part-time shift at a coffee shop downtown just to cover the gap. My parents called every Sunday. The calls were pleasant enough on the surface, but there was always a moment, always one specific moment in every conversation, where my mother would say something like, "You know the offer still stands." Or my father would mention that a neighbor's son had moved back home and was doing really well now. I always changed the subject. I always stayed polite, because I still loved them and I still believed, on some level, that they believed in me. What I did not know was that those Sunday calls were the only honest part of their week. Everything else they were doing was happening in the hours I could not see. The rejection that broke me the most came in December. A mid-sized brand consultancy had called me in for 3 rounds of interviews. 3. I had spent a cumulative 9 hours in that process. The final round was with the company's creative director, a woman named Sandra Ife, who had shaken my hand warmly and told me that my portfolio showed, and I am quoting her directly, exactly the kind of instinct we look for. I walked out of that building convinced I had the job. The email came 4 days later. Generic. 2 sentences. "We have decided to move forward with another candidate. We wish you the best in your search." I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at it for a very long time. I applied to 7 more companies before the new year. All silence. I began to spiral in ways I did not tell anyone about. I stopped sleeping properly. I started skipping the coffee shop shifts when the anxiety got too heavy, which only made the financial pressure worse. My remaining roommate, a kind woman named Priya, would sometimes leave a plate of food outside my bedroom door without knocking, which is one of the quietest acts of compassion anyone has ever shown me. I called my college friend Dominic one evening in January and told him I was struggling. He drove 2 hours to sit with me in that apartment and talk. He was the first person I told out loud that I was scared. Not frustrated. Not disappointed. Genuinely scared. "Something is wrong," I told him. "I am not bad at this. I know I am not bad at this." "I believe you," he said. And that was all he said. It was not until 3 weeks later that Dominic called me back with something that cracked my world entirely open. He had run into a former classmate of ours who had recently started working in HR at one of the companies I had applied to, one of the ones that had gone completely silent on me, and she had told him something that she probably should not have told him. She told him that she remembered my application. She remembered it specifically because of a phone call that came in from my father. There is a moment in certain stories where the ground just falls away, where the explanation you finally receive is so much worse than anything you had imagined that your body does not know how to process it. I had that moment in a coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon, listening to Dominic's voice shake. Her name was Renata Bloom. She had graduated 2 years ahead of us and had gone straight into HR. She was working as a recruitment coordinator at a company called Meridian Group, a brand consultancy I had applied to the previous September. My application had been strong enough to pass their initial screening and reach her desk for review. Renata told Dominic that before she could schedule me for a first interview, she received a phone call from someone identifying himself as my father. He told her that he was calling as a concerned family member. He said, calmly and with apparent sincerity, that I had a history of dishonesty on applications. He mentioned specifically a situation that had been handled privately to avoid court involvement, but that had left a record that would not appear on a standard background check. He implied fraud. He implied that I had been terminated from a previous position under troubling circumstances. None of it was true. None of it. I have never committed fraud. I have never been terminated. I have never had a complaint filed against me in any professional context in my life. I did not even get a parking ticket until I was 25. But Renata had no reason to disbelieve him. He was calm, he was articulate. He used the language of someone who had been through a painful situation and was reluctantly doing what he felt was the responsible thing. She flagged my application internally and quietly moved on. When Dominic told me this over the phone, I did not speak for almost 40 seconds. He kept saying my name softly, checking that I was still there. I was there. I just could not find the words. The first feeling was not anger. I want to be honest about that. The first feeling was grief. A specific, suffocating grief for the version of my father I thought I knew. Because the man Renata described was not careless or emotional. He was not drunk. He was not acting in a moment of rage. He had researched the company. He had used professional language. He had constructed a lie with deliberate, surgical precision. That is not a person who lost control. That is a person who planned. I drove home that night in a kind of fog. I sat on the floor of my kitchen for a long time, not crying, just sitting, thinking, processing the architecture of what had been done to me. Then I started asking the harder question. If it happened at Meridian Group, how many others had it happened at? I spent the next 2 weeks building a quiet investigation. I reached out to Dominic's contact at every company I could trace back through my own application history. I was careful. I was not accusatory. I framed my outreach as reconnecting or referencing a project. With some companies, I had no internal contact at all and hit dead ends. But in 3 additional cases, across 3 separate HR contacts, who had no connection to each other and no reason to coordinate their answers, I heard variations of the same story. A concerned family member. A record that would not show on paper. Handled privately. Proceed with caution. The calls had not come only from my father. In 2 of the 3 additional accounts, the caller had been a woman. My mother had been making calls too. They had done this together, both of them, systematically, for over a year, while calling me every Sunday and asking how the job search was going, while telling me they were proud of me, while suggesting gently that maybe the city just was not working out, and home was always an option. They were not just trying to control me, they were engineering my failure so completely that I would have nowhere left to go but back to them. I did not sleep at all that night, but I did start writing everything down. The moment you realize the damage is bigger than you thought is not a dramatic moment. It is quiet. It is a spreadsheet with too many rows. It is a list of names that keeps growing. I gave myself 3 days before I did anything. 3 days to make sure I was thinking clearly, because I knew that what I was about to do would require precision. Panic makes mistakes. Grief makes mistakes. I could not afford mistakes. On the 4th day, I opened a fresh document and began cataloging everything I knew. I listed every company I had applied to. I noted the ones where I had received unexplained silence after a promising start. I noted the ones where I had a potential internal contact. I noted the ones where I had already confirmed my father or mother had called. I color-coded the rows: green for confirmed, yellow for suspected, red for no information. By the end of the week, I had 4 confirmed cases and 6 suspected ones. Across those 4 confirmed cases, I had applied for positions at companies ranging from 12 to over 200 employees. Some had been my first-round applications. 2 had been positions where I had already reached the interview stage, including Sandra Ife's consultancy, which I now suspected was also on the list. I contacted a former intern from Sandra's company through a professional networking platform. I kept the message brief and professional, mentioning that I had been a candidate some months prior and was simply conducting informal research on their hiring process for a project. Within 4 days, she responded. She was helpful in the way that only genuinely good people are. She did not reveal anything confidential, but she said something that answered my question without meaning to. She mentioned that during that hiring cycle, there had been some unusual third-party contact regarding one candidate, and that it had created quite the internal conversation. I already knew which candidate she meant. The financial damage by this point was not abstract. It was concrete numbers. I calculated as precisely as I could the income I had lost across the 14 months of my blocked job search. The entry-level positions I had applied to averaged a starting salary of $42,000 annually. Across 14 months, the income loss was approximately $49,000. That did not include the cost of the additional coursework I had taken to make myself more competitive, the portfolio rebuild, the career coach I had paid for 2 sessions with before I ran out of money, or the therapy I had not been able to afford despite desperately needing it. It also did not include what I had lost that had no dollar amount: my confidence, my professional reputation among HR circles I had not yet even entered, the time I would never get back. And it did not include what had happened to my living situation. By February, I had been asked to leave my apartment. Not unkindly. Priya had genuinely tried to work with me, but without stable income, I was too far behind on rent. I moved into a hostel for 2 weeks, then into a transitional housing program run by a local women's organization. I shared a room with 3 other women. I kept my documents in a small lockbox under my bed. I woke up every morning in a place I had never imagined I would be and reminded myself, quietly and fiercely, that I was not going to disappear. I called Dominic from a payphone near the shelter one evening. I told him what I had found. All of it. He was quiet for a long moment and then he said, "Nadia, this is not just a family problem anymore. This is a legal matter." He was right. I had been hesitant to say it to myself, but hearing it from someone else made it undeniable. What my parents had done was not harsh parenting. It was not even manipulation. It had a name: tortious interference, defamation, potentially more, depending on the jurisdiction and the specifics. But I needed more than suspicion. I needed documentation. And I needed help from someone I had not spoken to in over a year. Someone who knew my parents better than almost anyone alive, and who had reasons of their own to want the truth to come out. The best allies in any battle are the ones who are already on the other side of the same wall. I had not expected mine to come from inside my own family. Her name was Aunt Cecile, my father's younger sister. She and my father had not spoken properly in almost 5 years, and the reason for that silence was something the family never discussed at the dinner table. I had always assumed it was a money disagreement, the kind that fractures families quietly and permanently. I had not pushed for details because, growing up, you learn which questions the adults in your life have decided not to answer. I found her through a mutual cousin who gave me a phone number without asking too many questions. I called on a Thursday evening from the shelter's common room, keeping my voice low and steady. Cecile answered on the second ring. I had expected her to be guarded. I had expected a polite but distant conversation, the kind you have with a relative who is present but not quite there. Instead, when I told her who I was and why I was calling, she went completely silent for several seconds. Then she said, "I was wondering when this day was going to come." She said it like she had been waiting for it. We talked for 2 hours. What I learned in that conversation rearranged everything I thought I understood about my family. Cecile told me that the estrangement between her and my father had nothing to do with money. It had to do with her. Specifically, with the fact that she had tried, 5 years ago, to help me. She had learned through family channels that I was planning to leave home after graduation, and she had reached out to a marketing firm in her city, a firm she had connections with through her work in public relations, to flag my name as a promising upcoming graduate. She had been trying to quietly set up an introduction for me before I even started my search. My father had found out. He had called Cecile directly and told her to withdraw the referral. She had refused. He had escalated in ways she described as controlled but frightening. When she still refused to back down, he had cut contact entirely and, she believed, had said damaging things about her to the rest of the family to isolate her. She had been positioned as the difficult one, the disruptive one, the sibling who could not respect boundaries. I sat with that for a moment. The word boundaries, in my father's mouth, had always felt like a weapon pointed outward. Then Cecile said something that made my spine go cold. She said she had kept everything, every email, every voicemail. 5 years of documentation because she had known, from the moment my father turned on her, that someday there would be a reason to have it. She had saved call logs. She had saved a voicemail in which my father explicitly told her to stop interfering with what he called family decisions regarding Nadia's future. She had saved the email thread in which he had warned her that if she continued to help me, he would make sure certain people in her professional circle knew things that would hurt her. That last one was particularly significant, because it established intent. It established a pattern of behavior. It established that what he did to me was not a one-time act of panic, but a sustained, calculated campaign to control my professional life. Cecile agreed to work with me. She said it without hesitation, in a voice that had no anger in it, only a kind of quiet resolve that I recognized because I had started to feel it in myself. She said she would provide everything she had to whoever needed it. Before we hung up, she said one more thing that I have not forgotten. She said, "Nadia, your father has always believed that love and ownership are the same thing. The fact that you are still standing after everything he has put you through means he miscalculated. And people who miscalculate always make mistakes." She was right. And he already had. Building a case is nothing like the movies. It is not one dramatic phone call. It is not a single smoking gun. It is patience. It is paperwork. It is holding your emotions completely still while the facts do the screaming for you. I met with a civil attorney named Marcus Webb 3 weeks after my conversation with Cecile. Dominic had found him through a colleague and vouched for his integrity before I made the call. Marcus worked primarily in employment law and had handled defamation cases before. He agreed to an initial consultation without a fee. I brought everything I had to that meeting: my application records, The informal statements I had gathered from HR contacts, Renata Bloom's account as relayed through Dominic, the timeline I had built, color-coded and annotated, Cecile's documents, which she had scanned and sent to me the previous week in a folder so organized it nearly made me emotional. Marcus went through everything slowly and without expression. He asked questions that were specific and technical. He did not react to the story emotionally the way most people had when I told them. He reacted to it legally, which was exactly what I needed. After 40 minutes, he set everything down and leaned back in his chair. He said that what I had was credible but not yet airtight. The informal HR accounts were not formal statements. They were secondhand, and in some cases the contact had been helpful, but not willing to go on record. What Cecile had was compelling and would be useful. The voicemail in particular established intent in a way that was difficult to argue against. But to make a defamation case worth pursuing, we needed at least one direct witness. Someone who had received the call personally and was willing to provide a formal written account. He told me to go back to Renata Bloom. I had been hesitant to involve Renata more formally because I did not want to put her in a difficult professional position. She worked in HR. She had shared sensitive information informally and probably already felt exposed by having done so. Asking her to formalize that information meant asking her to take a real risk. I thought about it for 2 days. Then I thought about the women in the transitional housing room with me, and the lockbox under my bed, and the spreadsheet with too many yellow rows. And I picked up the phone. Renata agreed to meet me in person. We met at a neutral location, a small restaurant near her office, and I laid out what I was trying to do as honestly as I could. I told her I was not trying to create a scandal. I was not trying to punish a company or expose her. I just needed one person who had been there, who had heard the voice, who could confirm what had happened. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "I told my manager about that call at the time. I flagged it in the internal system, which means there is a record." I had not known that. She said she would check whether that internal record was still accessible. And if it was, she would work with her company's legal team to determine whether it could be released as part of a formal inquiry. She could not make that decision alone, but she could initiate the conversation. It took 11 more days. On a Friday morning, Marcus Webb called me with news that I had to ask him to repeat because I could not quite believe it the first time. Meridian Group's legal department had confirmed that a third-party call regarding my application had been logged in their system in September of the previous year. The log included a timestamp, a caller ID, and a brief summary of the call's content. The caller ID traced back to a landline registered to my parents' home address in Garner Falls. There it was. Not a rumor, not a second-hand account. A documented, time-stamped, traceable record of my father calling a hiring company and misrepresenting my character. Marcus said, "We are ready to move." I said, "Then let's move." But I had one thing left to do before the legal machinery started turning. Something I needed to do for myself. I needed to look my parents in the eye first. There are confrontations built on rage. There are confrontations built on tears and accusations and slammed doors. Mine was none of those things, because I had learned something in the months I had spent living in a shelter and building a case in silence. Composure is the most devastating weapon you can bring to the fight. I drove back to Garner Falls on a Saturday morning in April. I had not told them I was coming. I had not called the night before. I had nothing with me except the clothes I was wearing and a folder of printed documents in the passenger seat, and that folder was not for them. It was for me. A reminder that everything I was about to say was grounded in fact and not emotion. My mother answered the door. She looked at me for a half-second with something that might have been surprise, and then her face reorganized itself into the warm, composed expression I had known my entire life. She said, "Nadia, what a surprise. Come in." as though I was dropping in casually on a Saturday afternoon, as though everything was fine. My father was in the kitchen when I walked in. He looked up from the counter and his expression was harder to read. He had always been harder to read. He said my name in his quiet, level voice and asked if I wanted coffee. I sat down at the kitchen table. They both sat across from me, the same table where I had grown up, the same blue and white tiles on the wall behind them, everything looking exactly like it always had. I told them I was not there for a visit. I told them I knew what they had done. For a moment, neither of them moved. My mother's hands were folded on the table and she did not unfold them. My father was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, something cautious and calculating that reminded me, painfully, of the way Marcus Webb had looked at my documents, like he was assessing exposure. My mother spoke first. She said that they had no idea what I was talking about. She said it in a gentle, concerned voice, as though I was a child having a bad dream. I told her that I had documentation. I told her I had formal corporate records. I told her I had testimony from people she had never met who had received calls from this exact address. I set the folder on the table. I did not open it. I just let it sit there. The room was completely silent for a very long time, and then my father said something that I have thought about every day since. He said, "We did what we thought was right for our family." He did not say it happened. He did not say it did not happen. He bypassed both and went straight to justification, as though the only question worth addressing was whether he had good intentions. I told him that what he thought was right had put me in a shelter. He said, and I want you to hear this clearly, "You should not have left." He said it quietly, without anger, without any visible remorse. He said it the way you say an obvious thing that has been made unnecessarily complicated. My mother was still looking at the table. I stood up. I picked up the folder. I said calmly that a civil attorney named Marcus Webb would be in contact with them the following week. I said that I had formal documentation of tortious interference and defamation across a minimum of 4 separate employment incidents. I said that Marcus had already been in conversation with 2 companies' legal departments, and that the matter was proceeding whether they participated cooperatively or not. I told them I was not there to fight. I was there to inform. I walked out of that kitchen without raising my voice once. I sat in my car in their driveway for about 10 minutes before I started it. I was not sad. I was not triumphant. I was something I had not felt in over a year. I was certain. My parents hired a family attorney within 4 days of my visit, which told me everything I needed to know about what they were actually afraid of. Innocent people do not retain legal representation in under 100 hours. The letter arrived in Marcus's office the following Thursday. My parents' attorney was a man named Gerald Sims, a general practice lawyer based in Garner Falls who, from what Marcus could tell, handled mostly real estate and estate planning. He was not a defamation specialist. He was not an employment law attorney. He was someone my parents knew, someone local, someone who they trusted in the way that people trust people they have coffee with. Marcus reviewed the letter and called me that afternoon. He said it was what he had expected. It claimed that my parents had acted out of genuine concern for my well-being. It claimed that any communications made to potential employers were expressions of protected parental concern and not actionable defamation. It requested that I cease all contact with third parties regarding the matter. Marcus said, "They are hoping you will back down." He said it with the tone of someone who had seen people back down before and was making clear he did not expect that from me. We did not back down. The formal complaint was filed 3 weeks later. Marcus structured it around 3 primary claims: defamation, for the false and damaging statements made about my professional character; tortious interference with prospective economic advantage, for the deliberate disruption of my employment opportunities; and intentional infliction of emotional distress, given the documented pattern of behavior and its measurable impact on my housing and financial stability. Cecile's materials were filed as supporting exhibits. The time-stamped log from Meridian Group was filed as primary evidence. Renata Bloom had worked with her company's legal team and provided a formal written account, which she signed. That took courage on her part, and I have not forgotten it. 2 of the other HR contacts I had spoken to informally agreed, after consulting with their own employers, to provide written confirmations that third-party calls had been received. Not all of them were willing to name specifics, but 2 were. That brought our confirmed count of affected applications to 6. 6 companies. 6 deliberate, premeditated phone calls spreading a lie about their own daughter. The story leaked, as these things sometimes do, before either side intended it to. I had not spoken to the press. Marcus had not spoken to the press. But someone, somewhere in the chain of people who knew pieces of the story, had mentioned something to someone. A local news outlet in the city ran a brief item about an unusual employment defamation case involving a parent and an adult child. It was vague enough that no names were mentioned, but within 2 days the item had been picked up by a larger regional outlet, and within a week, Marcus was receiving calls from 2 national news organizations asking for comment. We did not speak to any of them. Gerald Sims, on the other hand, apparently spoke to one. The article that appeared in a regional lifestyle section a week later included a quote from family sources, suggesting that I had a history of instability and that my parents had acted to protect others from a pattern of behavior they had witnessed firsthand. The article did not name me but described the case in enough detail that anyone who knew any part of the story would recognize it immediately. Marcus looked at that article and said something that I suspect he does not say often. He said, "They just handed us the case." Because Gerald Sims's media strategy had done exactly what you must never do in a defamation case when you are the defendant. It had created fresh evidence of the same behavior we were already suing for. The judge assigned to our case noted it in an early procedural hearing. My parents had claimed their original communications were private and parental. Their attorney had then facilitated a public statement repeating substantially similar claims. The wheels had started turning, and they were not going to stop. There is something strange that happens when justice finally arrives. You think you have been waiting for a thunderclap. You think you will feel the ground shake. Instead, it arrives in a manila envelope. It arrives in a conference room on a Tuesday afternoon. And it arrives quietly, the same way the damage was done. The case did not go to a full trial. 11 weeks after filing during the discovery phase, Gerald Sims contacted Marcus with a settlement proposal. It was low, almost insulting in its lowness, and Marcus told them so in a response that I imagine was professionally worded and personally withering. 2 weeks later, a revised proposal came in. My parents' position had changed significantly, and I suspected I knew why. The discovery process had required them to produce phone records. Producing those records had almost certainly revealed the full extent of the calls. Not 4, not 6, but, as Marcus quietly told me after the first discovery exchange, potentially as many as 11 separate instances across the 14 months I had been searching for work. 11 companies. 11 phone calls constructing and delivering the same fiction to different people in different cities. The number hit me hard. I sat with it alone for an evening before I responded to anyone. 11 times. Not once in a moment of panic. Not twice in a misguided burst of parental overprotection. 11. A committed, sustained operation against their own daughter's future. The settlement negotiation lasted 3 weeks. Marcus was precise and patient and absolutely relentless. The final agreement included a monetary figure that I am not going to specify precisely, but I will say that it covered the following things in full: my estimated income loss across the 14 months, the costs of the transitional housing period, all legal fees, compensation for documented emotional distress, and a future damage component accounting for the reputational harm to my early career. The total was significant. It was enough to fundamentally change what the next chapter of my life looked like. There were also non-monetary terms. My parents were required to issue formal written retractions to the companies that had received their calls. Marcus had insisted on this. It was not symbolic. It was practical. Those companies had rejected me based on false information, and some of them still had active positions. The retractions gave me something I had not had before: the ability to approach those companies again with my record clean. I did not attend the settlement signing in person. Marcus represented me. He called me afterward from the parking lot outside Gerald Sims's office, and when he told me it was done and gave me the final numbers, I thanked him and told him I would call him back. I sat in my kitchen, which by then was a kitchen in my own small apartment, one that I had moved into 2 months prior with money borrowed from Cecile and paid back within 6 weeks when the settlement came through. I thought about my father sitting across that table saying, "We did what we thought was right for our family." I thought about 11 phone calls. I thought about the coffee shop where I had bought the blazer for interviews. I thought about Priya leaving a plate of food outside my door without knocking. I thought about Renata Blum, who had risked professional discomfort to tell the truth, and Cecile, who had kept 5 years of files because she believed the day would come. And I thought about 24-year-old me, standing in a tiny apartment that smelled like old carpet, taping a quote above a desk that I did not yet know I would have to leave. "You are allowed to take up space." I had spent 14 months being made invisible by the two people who were supposed to want nothing more than to see me thrive, and every single company that had received a formal retraction letter now had my real name, my real record, and the truth. The calls had silenced me for 14 months. The silence was over. I want to end this story the way it deserves to end. Not with a dramatic twist. Not with anger. With the truth. 2 years after the settlement, I am a senior brand strategist at a firm I am proud of. I found the role through a direct referral from Sandra Ive, the creative director who had once told me my portfolio showed exactly the right instinct, and then, after receiving a retraction letter from her HR department, had reached out to apologize and ask if I was still looking. I am still in contact with Cecile. We have dinner twice a year. I am not in contact with my parents. I have made peace with that. And the quote I wrote on a piece of cardboard when I was 23 years old is now framed on the wall of my actual office. You are allowed to take up space. If this story moved you, stayed with you, or reminded you of something you needed to hear today, please subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story like this one. The next story is already waiting for you, and I promise you, it will be just as powerful.